Praised be Jesus Christ, and hello at the Gloria TV retreat that leads us towards the Feast of Christmas. Today we will make the second step of this retreat according to the second O antiphon. Remember, the O antiphons are sung in Vespers towards the end of Advent, and they prepare us to receive the birth of Christ in our hearts. Now, the most important thing in the second O antiphon is its beginning. That antiphon starts with O Adonai, and that is the Hebrew word for the English God. The first question must be, why is God called in a Latin antiphon O Adonai, while it should be O God, O Deus? And the answer is, this antiphon leads us deep into the Old Testament. And that means deep in our life of sinners. Remember that in the first antiphon we were invoking God as a wisdom, and wisdom is the one who gets our life in order. And that happened in baptism. In the second antiphon, O Adonai, we are confronted with our sins. And that leads us into the second sacrament, that is confession. Don't be surprised that the Old Testament is very long and the New Testament is comparatively very short. That's the history of our life. We have to be careful to understand that the first result of our encounter with God will be that He shows us our sins. The first steps into the spiritual lives are not that we are kind of hot and bothered and up in arms and in heaven and just excited about everything that happens. The first steps into the spiritual life are when we are confronted with who we are, when Adonai comes in our lives, the leader of the house of Israel, that is calling and screaming for the Redeemer. If we do not feel the misery of our lives, which means the need for the Redeemer, we will never become good Christians. We will always remain something of Sunday Catholics that haven't quite given up on practicing their faith but do not understand that to believe, to be a Catholic, to go to church is the center and the most important reason why they are here on earth, because they need it the way we need light and water and whatever else that is so essential for our lives. We must meet Adonai, the leader of the house of Israel, and we must become part of that house of Israel so that we really become Christians and have the motivation to be Catholics with all our being and with all we are. That is the first movement of the second O antiphon. And the next movement is when we say, who appeared to Moses in the fire of the burning bush. That's an important moment in the history of salvation, that burning bush. It's the first time when fire appears in the Bible. And that gives us the original meaning of what fire is. It is the presence of God. And it's not a destructive presence, because the bush is under fire, but it's not burning away, it's not consumed by the fire. And that's the life of the Catholic that has ordered his own life towards God. He will be fire. and he will not be consumed by that fire, but he will be turned into the same fire that God is. Later on, when the disorder comes stronger and stronger into the world, we will see that fire has also a destructive power. And that happens in spiritual life in any moment when we put ourselves against the presence of God in our lives. Then suddenly God will become our enemy. He will fight against our wickedness in order to save our goodness. We personally will look at him as at somebody who is constantly making troubles in our lives, because these lives need to have troubles because they go into the wrong direction. So when Adonai comes in our lives, he comes first with the fire power of his being that shows us that he is the one who turns our lives from the coldness of every day into the heat and presence of his divine being. That is the second step of that O antiphon we are meditating today. Having reached that point, we can go into the third part of the Adonai antiphon that says, and God gave him, Moses, the law on Sinai. That law is foretelling us what is good and righteous, what we need to do and what we shouldn't do. Once we have received that law, we will not get any better. And don't expect to get better just because somebody told you what to do. The problem is not so much that we know what we have to do, but even a bigger problem is that we have the force and are able to do what we ought to do. And that is the big issue, the big advantage and the big disadvantage of the law. The law tells us what to do, but it doesn't give us the power to do what we ought to do. Therefore, the fathers used to say, law was given for grace to seek. Once we have understood what our life is all about and what we need to accomplish in this life, we will also understand a second thing, namely, that we cannot do it by ourselves. And once we have understood that, we will have another motivation to search for God and to seek him, because he is the one who gives us the power to fulfill what he commands. Therefore, we speak about grace. Grace is the power of God that makes it possible for us to do good. And in that sense, the Old Testament and all the laws written down in the Old Testament have an incredible importance for our lives, because they tell us what is good, what is just, what a good man needs to do. And at the same token, they tell us that we don't do it. And the more we try to do it, often the less we have success. They show us goodness the way it is, and they show us our own misery, because we are not able to accomplish it. And in that sense, the whole of the Old Testament, that big book that we need to read regularly, that confronts us so openly and so honestly with sin, is just a one big long finger that points to Christ. People say terrible things about the Old Testament. They say, well, you know, we have the God of the Old Testament that is cruel and brutal and vindictive, and then we have the good, kind, soft, nice God of the New Testament who is just so wonderful. Come on, what are you talking about? Do you want to tell me that there are two gods in the Bible? Or you want to tell me that God has changed? after a while, that he thought that he should not behave the way he behaved so far. We speak about one God in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, and his goodness and justice is not changed during the centuries. The Old Testament shows us God under the perspective of the sinner. And the sinner will always see God as justice, as vengeance, as the one who wants good and fights evil. And that's the reason why it's so difficult for many people to become Christians, to change their lives, to become friends of God, because they are under sin. And under this perspective, they will always see God as their enemy. It's difficult to make that initial step into the goodness of God. It's always difficult for the sinner to make that step into the good God, into the merciful God and so on, because it's so difficult to understand for the sinner that God can be so different than the experience he has from him. That is the reason why we meditate on the law, to understand justice, and to understand mercy. And if we combine both, then we are true Christians that have understood the Old Testament and the New Testament. And when that has happened, we can walk into the fourth part of that Adonai antiphon that says, "Come and redeem us with an outstretched arm." No surprise anymore. If the Christian has understood the goodness of God, if he has seen how much is lacking to him in order to become what the commandments ask from him to be, then he will understand that there is only one solution to his life, and that solution is the outstretched arm of Adonai. Adonai is the one who gives us the law. And in a certain way, he smashes us through that law. But Adonai is also the God with the outstretched arm. That means he is the power of the weak. And he accomplishes what simple humans are not able to do. He gives us, he commands us what to do. And at the same moment, he gives us the force to do it, or even better, he does it for us. With his outstretched arm, remember the cross, when the Son of God, who is fully God, stretches out his arms in order to save us. Remember the cross, and you see both the commandment that makes us into sinners that need to be punished, and God himself, through his outstretched arm, he takes up upon himself and upon his Son the punishment that we deserve. And that happens, by the way, in a similar way in confession. That has so much to do with the second O antiphon, because confession is the second sacrament we have in our lives. Confession is the moment when we hand over to God the dirt of our sins. And in the same moment, God pays for that dirt of our sins by giving us his sanctifying grace. So there is this miracle exchange, that miraculous exchange that makes us who suffer under the law of God into saints that can live fully what the Old Testament has commanded us to do. And we do that by becoming, through the grace of God, more and more Christs. That's it. Well, I should have done better, but I'm afraid my brain was frozen today.